how to forgive and why it matters. I can almost guarantee that everybody watching this has had someone or several people in their life, work and home, who have let them down, hurt them intentionally or unintentionally, betrayed them, lied to them, left them out. And so the question then becomes, what do we do with that? What do we do with all that emotion? And so in this video, I'm going to unpack a number of different questions. We're going to talk about what the research has to say about forgiveness. What happens if we don't forgive? Look at a great example of a person who has done forgiveness really well. What forgiveness is not, what forgiveness is, and how to do it. Okay, so let's dive into that first question. What does the research have to say? So Journal of Personality and Social Psychology said forgiveness is a transformative process that involves releasing negativity toward the transgressor and possibly increasing positivity. So it is a process, okay? It is a process, very, very important. So what happens if we don't forgive? So what often happens, if somebody has done something that has really hurt us, usually our first emotion is anger. Now what happens if a person does not go through that process of forgiving? What a lot of times happens is that anger sits in a person and it can turn into bitterness. We probably all know a person that they're just bitter. They're bitter about life, they're bitter towards their spouse, their colleagues, their coworkers. They're just bitter. And so that's what often happens if we have that anger that sits in us and we don't process it out. It can turn into bitterness. It also can turn into depression. And so that's what's at risk. And then what happens is it affects our relationship. It affects our performance. It affects our communication. It affects, how we approach life. And so that's kind of what's at risk. So who's an example of a person who has done this extraordinarily well? And the first person that I think of would be Nelson Mandela. For anybody who thinks, how on earth could I forgive this person in my life who has hurt me so deeply? Think of Nelson Mandela. So imprisoned for 27 years, wrongfully imprisoned. And yet he realized and he came to a place where he chose forgiveness. He chose it. Okay, forgiveness is a choice. I love a couple of these quotes that he said. He said, forgiveness liberates the soul. Okay, forgiveness liberates the soul. It breaks the chains. He also says resentment is like drinking poison. He realized that if he was going to stay angry and bitter, it's like drinking poison. And so he realized that forgiveness equals freedom. Okay, so he's an incredible example of somebody who understands the power of forgiveness and who has also gone through the process of forgiving. So here's what forgiveness is not. Forgiveness does not mean we condone the behavior, we like the behavior, that the person shouldn't even have consequences for with what they've done. That is not free, and it doesn't also mean whether you have to allow that person back into your life. Forgiveness is about the past. You're going to still have to make a decision with what you're going to do regarding that person in the present and the future. Okay, so forgiving is really about the past. So what is forgiveness? Forgiveness is developing compassion. It's trying to see life through the other person's perspective. It's trying to see with where they're actually coming from. It is also accepting, it's a huge part of it is actually accepting for what has actually happened. All right, but it is a process. So how do you do it? So let's say you're watching it, okay, Karyn, I have someone or some people in my life I would really love to forgive. I'm at that anger stage, or I've kind of slipped into that bitterness. I'd love to kind of get to forgiveness, but how do I do that? So there's a number of things I'm going to share really quick, but the first thing to think of it is a process. It is a process and it is a choice. All right. So, and it takes time. It takes time. And the deeper the pain, the deeper the hurt, a lot of times means the longer it's going to take to forgive. Not necessarily for everybody, but that's certainly with what I've actually seen. So I find a really helpful mindset around this is for people who really want to say, I am in the process of forgiving. I'm not there yet, but I'm in the process of forgiving. I think even acknowledging that can be actually really healthy. When somebody has hurt us, there's usually kind of 4 stages that I actually see people kind of go through. The first stage is kind of anger, and that's kind of first step. The second one is kind of sadness. Third step is acceptance, and the fourth step is forgiveness. And it's like this process that people actually kind of go through, and that takes time. Okay, so I think it's really important to acknowledge how you feel according to those kind of 4 different stages. And so acknowledging the different stages is really important. And then when you realize, when you can kind of get yourself to, and you're processing, you're acknowledging your feelings, when you get to the forgiveness stage, and you'll know when you get there, it really is around freedom. It's like these chains that are on you have been broken. And it's for you to free yourself in terms of the chains. Okay, so that's kind of the stages of forgiveness. And then the last thing, once I help clients get to that stage, is then you can decide on your boundaries for the present and the future. Forgiveness is about the past, but you're still going to need to decide with what you want to do in that relationship with the present and the future. Do you want to have that person back in? Is it a good idea to invite that person back in? Or is it actually, it's okay to maintain distance in that relationship? That can be a whole other video. But you are going to have to decide on what are my boundaries going to be moving forward in this relationship, so that you don't put yourself in a situation where you're actually getting hurt again. So the boundaries for the present and the future, that needs to be a whole other video. This video is around forgiving the past. And if there's one thing you can think about in this topic, is realize that if you decide you want to forgive somebody in your life, and that you're going to get yourself to that final stage, that the reward is peace and freedom. And Nelson Mandela is an incredible example of what that looks like.